The tragic story of Colleen Stan, the girl in the box born in 1956, Colleen J. Stan was a free-spirited girl and an experienced hitchhiker. But one unfortunate day, her hitchhiking took her to the wrong place at the wrong time. After turning down two potentially dangerous rides, she finally settled on hitching a ride with a nice-looking couple. She had no way of knowing the darkness that lurked beneath this seemingly kind and ordinary family. The couple even had a baby in the back seat, which made them look even more harmless. Colleen happily sat in the car with them, completely blind to the horrific torture that awaited her. Colleen found a ride. In May of 1977, Colleen Stan decided to embark on an adventurous journey from Eugene, Oregon to Northern California. The 20-year-old believed herself to be a seasoned hitchhiker, so it was definitely not her first rodeo. Colleen was always cautious about taking lifts from strangers. She was careful to avoid anyone that seemed even mildly threatening. So, when she found a young couple willing to give her a ride, she was pretty ecstatic. The couple was 19-year-old Janice and her 23-year-old husband, Cameron Hooker. Things went downhill. The purpose of Colleen's expedition was to attend a friend's birthday, and she was really looking forward to it. 30 minutes of the long drive went without a hitch. But suddenly, Cameron pulled into a dirt road and held a knife to Colleen's neck. He then gagged her, tied her up, and stuffed her into a box that was hidden in the trunk. She was forced to wear the 20-pound head box, which was soundproof to isolate her from the surroundings. When they reached the couple's California home, Cameron stripped Colleen and dragged her to the basement that would be her home for many years to come. The first night. Colleen's torture began the same night she was abducted. After being chained to the ceiling, Cameron tortured her and forced her to watch despicable things. He then stuffed her inside the special wooden box that looked a lot like a crate. 20-year-old Colleen was sure that Cameron was going to kill her. Soon, the couple moved into a trailer that didn't have a basement. Cameron made another box that was the size of a coffin. The box was kept below their mattress, and Colleen was forced to lie in it at all times. In the hot summer months, the temperature in the box would go up to 100 degrees. The kids were clueless. Colleen was only allowed out of the box for a few hours. During that time, she either babysat their kids or cleaned their house. Cameron and Janice had two daughters who were completely clueless about Colleen's captivity. They were very clever about hiding all evidence of Colleen's presence from their house. Laying in the small coffin for hours on end left Colleen with severe back and shoulder damage. Apart from being their full-time maid, she was also subjected to horrific forms of torture, including electrocution and food deprivation. The master-slave contract. After a few months of captivity, Colleen was coerced into signing a slave contract by her captor, Cameron. The contract forced her to become the couple's personal property and give away all the freedom she had. Cameron renamed her Kay and demanded that she address him as master and his wife as ma'am. These were just a few things they did to make Colleen completely submissive. After she signed the contract, Colleen was finally awarded the privilege to go upstairs and move around a bit more. The mafia involvement. In order to quell any rebellion from Colleen, Cameron threatened the lives of her loved ones. He convinced her that he belonged to a powerful mafia organization called the Company. This imaginary mafia organization would destroy her life if she tried to escape. She wasn't even allowed to make contact with the outside world. He told manipulative tales about the special organization and how much power they held. Naturally, Colleen was absolutely terrified of all the torture and pain he had threatened her with. Perhaps that's why she didn't try escaping for so long. The role of Janice. The couple's cruelty knew no bounds. Once, they forced Janice into a small hole and left her there for a week. When the hole filled up with water, they reluctantly moved her back to the coffin. Cameron wasn't the only torturer. Janice was equally evil and ruthless. Colleen revealed that Janice threatened that stepping out of their house would be a death sentence. She also inflicted a lot of psychological torture on her, much like her husband. In that sense, Janice was also totally complicit in the crimes against Colleen. Worse than hell. Imagine spending 23 hours of the day in a box shaped like a coffin for 7 years. Colleen Stan actually survived that horrific scenario and lived to tell the tale. She couldn't even avail any opportunities to escape as she was too scared about the company. She later told all the horrific details of her torture in an interview with Closer magazine. She received either a sandwich or potatoes only once a day. The couple didn't even let Colleen use a bathroom to relieve herself. Visiting the parents. After 3 years of living a miserable life in her tiny coffin, Cameron was generous enough to give Colleen some freedom. In 1981, he surprisingly took Colleen to visit her parents. Despite being in the same room as her parents, she didn't say a word about her captivity. She was too scared that the company would kill her family just like Cameron had promised. She introduced Cameron Hooker as her fiancé. Her parents were delighted and even took a picture of the seemingly happy couple. Little did they know, Colleen was being held against her will and tortured on a daily basis. Colleen's parents. You must be wondering why Colleen's parents had done nothing to find her for 3 whole years. Why didn't they file a missing persons report for their daughter? Well, it turns out that they had no idea if Colleen was actually in trouble or not. They were concerned for her, but they believed she joined a cult. The parents simply had no idea how she was being abused by the guy she called her fiancé. When she visited her parents' house, she was completely under Cameron's influence. The taste of freedom. By 1979, Colleen was allowed to stay out of the coffin for longer periods of time. When June 1980 rolled around, she got transferred to the back bathroom of the house instead of the coffin. Fast forward 3 years in captivity and Colleen was allowed to work on her own. By this point, she was so brainwashed and manipulated that Cameron was sure she wouldn't try running away. Colleen started working at a local motel as a maid and Cameron informed her that she was going to be his second wife. Janice strikes back. This announcement disturbed Janice, who had been dutifully assisting him in torturing Colleen. Janice and Cameron had made a deal. She would let him torture Colleen and keep her as a slave, but she drew the line at sleeping with her or marrying her. Initially, Cameron agreed to these terms, but over the years, he began to get more involved with Colleen. He had already decided that Colleen was going to be his second wife. Janice was not prepared to let this happen. She simply had to do something to stop her husband from marrying Colleen. Janice, victim or perpetrator of violence? Janice believed herself to be a victim, just like Colleen. She revealed that Cameron had tortured and hurt her routinely after they got together. According to her, Cameron brainwashed her into kidnapping a woman and keeping her as a slave beneath their bed. The only way to satisfy her husband's violent urges was to let him enslave someone. If she hadn't agreed to his deal, she would be at the receiving end of the torture. People have varying views on whether Janice is as innocent as she claims to be. It's difficult to tell whether she was as malicious as Cameron or simply a victim of Stockholm Syndrome. When Janice met Cameron. Janice met Cameron Hooker in 1972. She belonged to a very conservative family which didn't allow her to date. Somehow, Cameron convinced them to let Janice go on a date with him. He immediately revealed his disturbing side by tying Janice to a tree on their first date. Perhaps Janice was too young to understand what a huge red flag this was. Soon after that, Cameron started abusing Janice. She soon realized that he was a sadist who enjoyed hurting people. They were married in 1975, after which he treated Janice as his slave. After enduring his deviant fantasies, she finally allowed him to keep someone else as a slave so she could get some freedom. The Great Escape. After 7 years of being a slave to Cameron, Colleen had gathered enough courage to attempt her first escape. Fortunately, Janice was ready to help her for her own selfish reasons, of course. After her husband had expressed the desire to marry Colleen, Janice wanted to get rid of her entirely. So, she did the best thing she could think of. She told Colleen how the company was completely made up. Janice encouraged Colleen to run away as it wouldn't pose any threat to her family. Whether Janice did this out of kindness or jealousy, we might never know. Gathering the courage. As soon as Colleen was made aware of how the company was fake and there was no mafia organization, she decided to leave once and for all. With Janice's help, she was able to finally escape the clutches of the man who'd held her captive for so long. Janice dropped her off at the bus station and she immediately called her dad. He sent her a ticket to Oregon so she could make her way back home. Colleen even called Cameron to report that she had run away and left him for good. We're happy to know that Colleen didn't let her horrific past define her future. She got married, had children, and even became a grandmother. She offers advice and helps victims who have gone through similar experiences as her. Janice has also changed her name and lives in California. The dangers of Stockholm Syndrome. The Stockholm Syndrome is a condition in which victims develop feelings of empathy or even love for their captors. It stems out of a survival instinct that exists deep within all of us. That's exactly what Colleen had been facing as well. Not only did she believe Cameron's lies, but Colleen also remained loyal to him even when he tested her by letting her visit his parents. After her escape, she most likely had to go through extensive counseling to resolve years of trauma. She later explained that she used to remove herself from the situation and traveled somewhere else within her mind. The case got famous. The unbelievable case of Colleen Stan fueled countless movies and TV shows. People were intrigued by her story and her resilience. Criminal Minds dedicated an episode called Cradle to Grave to Colleen's case. Law and Order also released an episode called Slaves that was loosely based on Colleen's ordeal. The horror movie The Poughkeepsie Tapes took the main plot from her story. Many other imaginary serial killers and sadists were modeled after Cameron Hooker. Colleen Stan started being nicknamed the Girl in the Box. Another famous case of abduction in which the girl was lucky and clever enough to escape her captor is the famous story of Elizabeth Smart. After she was able to run from her living nightmare, she went on to inspire countless victims around the world. Read on to learn about her incredible life. She kept it under wraps. After enduring 7 years of abuse, Colleen Stan couldn't possibly return to normalcy so easily. Even after reuniting with her family, she didn't say a word about the horrors she had faced. Perhaps she was scared about the consequences of revealing it all. Before she ran away from Cameron, Colleen made Janice promise that she wouldn't alert the authorities about her harrowing experiences. She was naive enough to believe that Cameron was salvageable. According to Colleen, all he needed was some repentance and counseling. Janice comes clean. Janice somehow regained her senses after Colleen ran away. She finally realized that her husband was beyond repair. He was deeply disturbed and would continue to perpetrate violence if not stopped right away. To get more clarity, she confessed her sins to a pastor. The pastor turned out to be a real savior because he encouraged Janice to contact the authorities and report her husband. Naturally, she was very reluctant, but the pastor somehow convinced her to take the leap. In November 1984, just a few months after Colleen's escape, Cameron Hooker was finally arrested. Janice escaped the charges. Despite being involved in the kidnapping and abuse of Colleen Stan, Janice wasn't charged with any crimes. There's a lot of debate about whether Janice deserved to be called a victim. We're not sure what her motives were, but she ended up being the one who saved Colleen and other women from Cameron's sadistic fantasies. Cameron, on the other hand, was convicted of kidnapping and sexual assault. Janice was granted full immunity if she testified against her husband, and she took the deal. Prosecutors think that Janice was also psychologically tortured and manipulated into doing horrible things. Cameron may have had more slaves. This story seems like it's taken out of a crazy horror movie. Unfortunately, people like Cameron and Janice actually exist. It's scary to imagine that a couple with 2 young children had such dark skeletons in their closet. These are the kinds of horrifying stories you see on Criminal Minds. What's even more shocking is that Colleen Stan might not have been the first slave Cameron had captured. As the investigation progressed, some more sinister secrets were revealed. Janice testified against Cameron. Janice had chosen to betray her husband and gain full immunity. During the trial, she revealed more shocking details about Cameron Hooker and his vicious crimes. To everyone's surprise, Janice told everyone how Cameron had actually captured another girl named Marie Elizabeth Spanhake. They had kidnapped Marie in a similar fashion. Cameron then took her to their home and subjected her to the same torture. But this time, he murdered the woman. Unfortunately, the police failed to find any evidence linking Cameron to her death. Ultimately, he was sentenced to 100 years in prison. Where is everyone today? Cameron received the punishment he deserved and will most likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. Colleen Stan has changed her name and made a lot of progress with some intensive therapy. She went on to get a degree in accounting.